Oh, there you go. There's a recording. Thank goodness that the part that I just said, what upsets you about the world is not recorded. That's great. What are some of your frustrations that you wish
I
that,
think
go ahead.
labeling and like diagnosis are some things that yeah, grinds my gears.
So, if you want to do research about it, what kind of research would you like to do?
Mm. But my solution focused brain goes to maybe it's not important. Maybe it's more important to research what works and what is working um, than arguing with arguing with it.
Then probably if that's what you want to do, you might want to do comparative research, right? So
Mhm.
researching, is it better? So like one is researching what's working, research what's not working, and do a comparison study. Wouldn't that be fun?
Mhm.
Yeah, what are some
Sounds
of
good
your,
to
yeah,
me.
exactly. And how do we go about designing it? Because there are different ways of designing. And I think often that topic is research question is one thing, but also the design of it is what usually makes people slightly nervous. Yeah. Hey, what else? What other research topics do you have? And Kati, I have some questions for you too, because, you know, I know that, Kati, you've actually read a lot of research. And I think the question that comes down to me, to all of you too, is that what kind of research sort of redefined or refined the work that you do? What difference, like the research that made a difference for you? Kati, you have an example of that?
Oh yeah, I have an example of that. And it was an early stage of the microanalysis research as it
Mm.
came out later, actually. I
Hmm.
met the microanalysis research through workshop with Harry Corman as they were still working for the article of 2013,
Hmm.
comparing the different approaches to therapy, how actually the therapist relates to what was said uh, in by then by the
Hmm.
client. And Harry Coleman used to say it's a basic research. It doesn't have any implication for further
Basic
purposes.
research.
It's just basic research. But we spent hours in looking exactly on those frame for conversations. And it already pushed me towards paying more attention. What am I doing? And it also freed me to be um, very picky of
Hmm.
what do I keep from the text of my
Hmm.
client and what do I omit of it and not build on that.
Yeah, it's
And you?
amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah. And when we call something basic research, we think of the word basic as like basic easy. Well, basic doesn't mean easy. Basic means it's the base of
Mhm.
what we do.
Mhm.
So, I mean, how do we get better at those basics? And I remember talking to my pastor, and I was like trying so hard to like be good and do all these good things that I used to try. And then my pastor said, it basically, basic, it comes down to a couple things, and you don't have to worry about all the other things, but just comes down to, and he said, love your God and love your neighbors. And just that's something that you do. I'm like, yeah, it's not easy. Think about it. Basic doesn't mean easy. Like I have a hard time loving my neighbors. So basic, how do we get better at those basic? How do we get back to those basic of listening? What's the basis of our practice? And slowing down so that as Kati, that research about how do we choose what to respond to? And it's almost like musicians practicing with a metronome. Learning something for the first time and have the metronome on, but if it's the piece is supposed to be played at like, let's say 112, then your practice starts from like metronome at 60. You start slow. And no musicians like doing that. But that is the practice and the discipline. And how do we do that? Some of you are nodding because you're probably, you're a musician. You know what I'm talking about, right? And I'm going to continue with this idea of like, I'm going to ask you, what research do you wish that we had, especially in solution focused, like field? What research do you wish that we just had? Shema, by the way, killing each other will never bring peace. How do we prove this? We can have control group and experimental design number one, where actually we kill some people. Experimental design don't kill. No, I'm kidding. Some research design, it needs to be reflecting not only the research question, but also the ethics. So then that's why we do process of like ethics protocol. Because I mean, if we want to study a topic like that, we cannot experimental design it like this, like, yeah, control group and then design one, design two. So we need to have ethics. And how do we go about those? How do we navigate those things? But for example, Shema, if this is your frustration with the world, what kind of research would you do without killing people? Yeah. Because usually research, it comes from some sort of discontentment. It's some people think that, oh yeah, we do research because we're curious. That curiosity had a little bit of like a home in discontentment. You are not happy with something. And often I am not happy with how we have this telecommunication company here that is a huge supporter of mental health and this and that. But then they actually just, and I was at their huge like convention today, and they have this booth, and on their booth it said, "We are proud sponsor of blah blah blah," and all the approaches in CBT. And I'm like, I want that word to be solution focused, approach rather than just CBT. Slight discomfort. And I'm like, I wish we have this research to show how this is either superior or equal to, and then that's what I mean. That discontentment is there. What research do we need? Do we want? Gail, you just unmuted, so I'm just calling on you. Sorry, is that okay? You
Sorry.
muted yourself. There you go. You got it.
Oh, from that. I'm not really sure that there's anything that stands out for me. I really liked what Shane was saying before, but I get what you mean, how it would be really difficult to actually research that. Um,
Good.
yeah, I'm just curious about what you were saying about that little bit of discontent, and it made me think of when I was going through my masters and thinking of what I would like to really do more about. And yeah, just was reflecting on that. What was it that I was just not content with? And it's true, there is that element of discontent. Otherwise, you're not going to fight for something. You're not going to
Mhm.
take something on board. You're not going
Yeah.
to. Um, it's not going to drive you
hmm
because you
And
want to
when
see
you
change.
And when you think about it, Gail, you must
Mm.
be reading some. I mean, I'm going to ask all of you this question. What is one piece of research that you read? And you don't have to be like reading research from like front to, back. A piece of research that you heard about, you read about, maybe one page summary that made an impact so that you're doing something different. Okay. And it could be in your practice or in your life. You read about this research, so you are now doing something different. Could you actually put it in the chat box? Some of those research that you're now reading about or you read about. So I'll give you an example. As Kati was sharing that piece of research, microanalysis is a huge impact on my work, especially around this idea that I learned solution focused as a set of questions, like clever questions that we can ask. And then I became increasingly annoyed. Like, see, annoyance, another great source of research. I got annoyed. So then I was like, really? Is that what it is? Like, we just have to memorize some questions and that's it? And that moment came when I was doing master class, and then I invited Peter DeYoung to do the master class for my coaching students. And then one by one, all my coaching students, they were doing a demo, like 10-minute demo in front of like everyone. And they all started with, what are your best hopes? And then, or something similar. How would you know that this was useful? And they almost follow the formula, like how Ellen here is saying that we have this almost like a formula that we follow. And then by the end of it, they ended with, so what are your some of next small steps that you can take? And I thought, brilliant, everyone memorized. And then Peter actually, after listening to about 10 of them, we were walking back to the hotel and he said, you must be a really good teacher. And I'm like, oh, thank you. Yeah, yeah, I guess I am. And what he meant was that everyone was doing what I was teaching them, but then he then said everyone was doing the same thing. Now, I didn't know the difference between doing the same thing and doing um, something that is consistent, but it needs to be different for each. But I didn't understand that back then. So then that stayed with me. And I was like, what's wrong with everybody actually repeating the same question? Because my students were memorizing the line, but they were not listening to the client. So then that frustration led me to study microanalysis and led me to do this piece of research myself. I think, Kati, I shared this research with you a couple of years ago about studying what did Insu do in her session. So if I want to study, what do we do? What actually happens in a session? Like if we're not just shooting question after question, what else do we do? How would you go about designing this research? If I want to study what people do, and if I want to know if all we do is asking questions, how would you go about designing this research? So as you think about it, first thing that you know that we should do is transcribe. We need to have a transcript because I want to study what they say. But not only that, it might be useful to have a video because then I want to see the context in which those things are said. So you see how microanalysis just fit. And for me to specifically look at what is that Insu does? And how many times is she asking a question? How many times is she not? For me to do that, I had to do this very simple exercise of counting all the words that she says. Every utterance is counted. How many words that she says? And then I studied how many of those words were used to make questions. And then what does she do with the rest of the words if she's not using them all to make up questions? So take a random guess. I was not expecting this result, by the way. Take a random guess of the ratio. How much of all this, let's say she said 1,000 words. How much of that do you think she used for making questions? Just a random guess. Do you remember this, Kati? Yeah.
That actually changed time teaching more.
Wow. Yeah, random guess. What do you think? How many words, like by ratio out of 1,000 words, that Insu was using in this particular tape anyway? But it was pretty consistent actually throughout different tapes. What do you think?
300 out of 1,000? Guessing? Just a random guess?
Just a guess. About 300. 250 to 300 words out of 1,000. 25 to 30% of all the words that she uttered were used for questions. And this was a shock to me because I was, learning solution focuses, question-based thesis. And then I'm like, what is she doing with the rest of it? Like, she says so much stuff, But then only quarter or 30% is used for questioning. So what is she doing? This is how research develops.
Wow. Oh,
I know, isn't that
wow.
crazy?
Wow.
Right? Like there are like, 500 words of wow. No. She's doing something else than asking questions. And in microanalysis, we call it, there are many other things. Listener response is, for example, wow. So we counted that too. But there are so many other things that she's doing called formulations. Responding to the client, whether you're preserving their language, summarizing, echoing, and all those things, she does that. Now, then, to build on it, we then ask questions in what direction is she building on? So, you see how research can build and build and build? It's almost like doing a renovation in your house. Yeah, you think doing that is a 3-week project? Yeah, good luck with that. Before you know, changing your toilet becomes like 3 months project of like doing the whole thing.
Hey, and let's slow down. That's the outcome of your, hey, what is it? If it's not just asking questions, but this design, how you went about it, I think that's remarkable. How did you come up with that idea?
Because I was so frustrated. So then, how else would you actually study? Is she all she's doing is just asking questions? How else would you study it? There are probably many other ways. Initially, it started with counting how many questions that she asked. But then it quickly became some questions are sometimes embedded, sometimes formulations are embedded in questions. So then it was very difficult to count question as a question or statement as a statement because some statement actually worked like a question. So then we had to be very micro and count every word that she spoke. And then the tricky thing is now do we count that? How do we count that? Is that a word? So it becomes very hazy. So you need to decide the scope of how granular you will be. So then we do operational definitions of what I mean by utterance, for example, meaningful chunk of um, utterance. So then that becomes our, it's not defined universally. That's something that we define. For some of you who know my work on the quadrant, for example, so many people ask about, on this quadrant of past to future and all those things. What about the now? Then we have to define the now. That's a research framework that you define and you tell people this is how I defined it, right? So coming back to this idea of all of us as pracademics, people who are doing the practice, but also might have a bit of frustrations about what we want to see things different. Now, if you were to design a research because you are so curious about how do you know whatever you do is making a positive difference for your client, how would you go about designing that research? And if you're already doing something with that research, please tell us. But how do you go about designing that kind of research? What would you do? And Kati, as people are thinking, oh, Rhonda, yes, please. You just
I'm
unmuted.
not,
I'm like,
I'm
yeah.
absolutely not sure, but I'm thinking you might have some pre-test and then you would have some post-tests at 3 months, 6 months, etc., to see if
Mhm.
there's any change in,
Okay.
what they were doing.
Now, Rhonda, that's such a great example of outcome research, right? So we set up this baseline, or, for those of you coming from organizations, background, it's benchmarking. This is where you are. And then it's almost like drug. My dog that's currently having a bit of like issue, we have a baseline X-ray, and then now we have an intervention of antibiotics and all these things, urinary, whatever, something special diet, so expensive. Anyway, so then we do those intervention, and then every now and then we do blood work and we do X-rays. Now, outcome study, 3 months. How small are the kidney stones? I don't know. So we have these things that we set up for outcome studies. It's a great example of an outcome study, Rhonda. Yeah. What else? How else would you go about designing a research to show if you want to know how do you know that whatever you do is making a difference? How would you go about designing that research? And Kati, how would you go about what will be a really cool research to design?
Whoa. Oh. I'm just still hanging at the labeling example from Dion, because it's getting more and more convenient to have a label in situations. And I also meet clients who really relieved by receiving a label.
Yeah.
And I'm strongly not agreeing. That would be cool to show that there are other ways, or at least, other ways. Yes.
You know, there's a really interesting piece of research I can tell you. It's a pretty solid design too. That it comes from healthcare, where they have researchers watching the videotape afterwards about the interaction between patients and physicians. And they have from scale of 1 to 6. 1 is helpless, like total dependent client or patient. 6 is aggressive. So they have this interesting scale. And then they're rating their behaviors from like, looking at it. And then they are also looking at, they ask physicians to rate after their interaction, like how, on the same scale, how would you rate this patient? Then what they look at is accuracy of their diagnosis. So what do you think the research question is in this design? They had researchers looking at the behaviors from outside, rating it, and then they asked the physician themselves to rate how they felt about this patient on a same scale, 1 to 6. And then after the physician actually makes the diagnosis, then people look at how accurate the diagnosis was, right? So now, what kind of research question do you think they had in mind? And Rochelle says, how does the patient impact the diagnosis? So more specifically, does aggressive behavior of a patient impact diagnostic accuracy? And that was the research question. And so usually how you design it can actually tell a story about what they were frustrated by. So probably these people are frustrated. Now, in this research that was done, especially it's in internal medicine, and not only they're looking at how does it impact, but also they have some measures in there to make sure that this is reliable. So when they use measure of physicians doing the self-report and also other people from outside looking at it, and then they can compare if there's a consistency or it's a reliable sort of measurement. You see, because if it's just depending on, the physician's, thing, it might be slightly biased or whatever. Every research is biased, by the way. So then they have that measure in place. Now then, when they do this diagnosis, just take a guess. Would that actually make an impact? Do you think it actually had an impact on the accuracy of a diagnosis? Clients' aggressive behavior, perceived aggressive behavior. Other measures include, is that just a perception of a physician, or is that kind of like other people see it too? All of that. So by how much, Rochelle, do you think the error rate of diagnosis was? When the physicians felt that the patient is aggressive on a scale of 1 to 6, 6, okay? When they felt like that, what was the error rate? And also they looked at simple cases and complex cases. Some cases they also asked physicians to take their time afterwards, do some reflection, come back and confirm the diagnosis, or feel free to change it. All these conditions, and then what was the error rate? Tracy, 80% error? Come on, these are like, like trained professionals.
I've 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 had my own personal experiences
I
with
hear you.
physicians, and especially if you go in to an appointment informed, they shut you down as fast as they can.
Oh, yeah. Here, the student interns actually start in July. So we have a saying, do not get sick in July. Okay. We have a lot of student physicians starting in hospitals. Actually, if you want to study the impact of student interns and death rate, you can do that too. Actually, they do have research about that. Now, error rate of physician diagnosing and accuracy, 42%. It's almost like every other diagnosis was wrong. Be good to your physicians, okay? Don't be aggressive. So please don't feel 42% is a crazy number, especially if we're talking about simple diagnosis. And they make errors like that, almost every other person, just because of perceived aggression. So, we do studies like this because it has an impact. For example, what are some other examples of research that you want to see happen in our field, in our community? I'm really like drilling this because we need to think like researchers. And
I
what do you wish that we had? Tracy,
I really want to challenge the with research already existing around the skills of a practitioner at graduation. And basically what I understand is the research says on graduation, you're the best you're going to be. And I want to challenge that. I disagree. I agree, but I think that there's a reason why. And if we address that reason, we would see improvement. But unless there's research around it, nobody's going to answer the question.
mm-hmm. Yeah, you see? And then think about how you might go about designing that research. And earlier what Rhonda was talking about also is not only an outcome research, but also, Tracy, if you were to go about studying something like that, then would we actually go with a route of interviewing or survey or questionnaires or quantitative, or would we actually collect stories of people? Maybe stories over time, stories of them or people that they work with. Would we do interviews? And those are all the methodologies that we put into practice depending on what you want to find out. So, as of 2014, we had thousands and thousands of outcome research, especially in coaching. So, we don't need any more outcome studies. We all know all the modalities are useful. They all work somehow. So then we don't need more outcome studies. Yes, it works. We answered it. Now, what's not being answered is how does it work? Now we're back to this like aspirin. It works, but how does it work? Well, about that. So we don't need any more. I mean, I would say outcome research is always fun to do, but then what we are lacking is process research. How does it work? And how do we know that that's how it works? So it's a meta as well. But process research is really lacking. And now I'm going to really post this to all of you who really want to do research to think about. What is absolutely lacking is the connection between process research and outcome research. Meaning, here's what we do in session, and we can link this specifically to outcomes that we see over time. That is lacking. So then if you're doing research, if you're thinking about doing research, that's the direction that I think there's nothing on it right now. So there are a few studies approaching, but there isn't much on it. Even the process studies are mostly based on, I think earlier I saw in the chat, Ellen, you're saying internal process, something that people, that's going on inside their head. And then sometimes we even use like fMRI or EEG and all those things. But then how do we connect the dots? And that's a big question. And is it useful to connect the dots anyway? Yeah. So I'm going to just keep asking this question. It's being recorded. What frustrates you about our work? I wish we had this research to show. Like, what else is a really good research topic? Miriam.
This doesn't actually frustrate me so much, but I've just written the question in the chat as well. And I think I'm curious about what difference it makes to like our clients in terms of outcomes for them.
Wow.
And I think I notice myself that the more solution focused I am, the more I like my clients. So I think it's an interesting question to ask.
It is a very interesting question, isn't it? And I can think of so many researches designed for this one. And does it actually link to the outcome? Not only, I mean, we have research on therapeutic report and all those things. And then there's some newer research that shows that when clients perceive that you care for them, then actual clinical outcome is better. I mean, that classic study of physicians deciding to sit or stand in consultation. To sit or not to sit is the, research name. And in emergency department. And so time spent, the perception of time spent for the patient is so much longer for people who are sitting down when the actual time was about the same. But patients, when they feel like he was sitting with me, they must have spent more time. Perception of care directly influence their outcome, clinical outcome over time. So yeah, I think we can replicate something like that easily, no? Yeah. Hey, what
Probably.
else? Yeah, what do you think, Miriam? I think it will be a worthwhile study, don't you think?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. And here's the thing, Kati and I, we were actually talking about why are we actually hosting this space? It's because we want to make a call to all of you who are actually interested in studying something together, researching something together. I mean, we don't have to do the research together, but just gather together and share your ideas, and we can sort of do feedback and so on. I think it will be a really useful Pracademics gathering that we can start with something like this. So that was actually my best hope and our best hopes. Kati, is that still your hope?
Yes.
Yes. Now, seriously, what else? One question is, what piece of research have influenced your work? And second question is, what research would you like to see done? Okay, friends, did you actually have a comment on?
Yes, if I may. Just on reflecting on what I would be curious on is what's going on in the mind of a client. If there's a way to research the process that they're going through and how that's linked to outcome. And I think in research, what's the word? Phenomenological research?
Yes.
It's self-reporting. It seems like
What's
it's in fashion
emerging?
now. Yeah. So I'll be curious on that. But I came up against quite a few barriers when it comes to research. And one is the funding model with the institution that I'm studying under, or the institutions that I'm studying under. And every time how they fund it or what they are happy to fund seems to push the direction of the research in a different direction, and I usually end up researching stuff I didn't really want to in the first place. So I wonder what you can do about that, because that's my biggest frustration. Speaking of frustrations, and
Yeah. Yes. How do we keep the research in its intended form? I mean, it's different, friends, if you think about how research may develop into something else, because like every research starts with something, but it evolves, it develops, and the more you figure out, it goes here, it goes there. And right now, I've been doing this comparison research for like 2 years. I thought it was going to be like a 6 months project. So we are comparing different coaching modalities, including solution focused and cognitive and all these different coaching models. And I thought, sure, 6 months, no problem. We transcribe the whole thing, and then before you know it, it's 2 years on. It's not because, funding model change. It's because the more you look at it, there's something new. There's something new. So there's an expression, rabbit hole. Yes, that's what I'm doing right now. So then how do we scope it so that we protect some parts, but also we actually maintain the openness of what may emerge from it, right? And then it's all in the research design too. If you want to do it, and this is a word that a lot of people have a hard time with, phenomenologically. There you go. So then leaving that room for what emerges. And some research design does not allow that. And that's totally okay. It's not good or bad. It's just your decision. Yeah. Oh, that would be such a cool thing to look at. How do we fund this too? Hey, what else?
Well, on building on Frances' question there, like it'd be interesting to see how does funding models influence the type of research that comes out of different countries or different, and this I think there is research on this, for example. You get very different research coming from Scandinavia than you do from the US, but
because what gets funded gets published, eh?
yes, yeah.
Yeah. And I just met with EBTA board, and some of the things that they are thinking about that we need research on it comes out of frustration too, that for solution focus to be recognized or continue to be recognized as a model that can be used for European psychotherapy or psychology association or something like that, then we need to meet certain things. They ask for, here, apply for your status or something, and you have to do these assessments, but then it's a psychopathological questions, and then a lot of solution focused practitioners like, I don't understand the question. And then we end up maybe then not being recognized. And then, so then the gap, it's not funded because it's not recognized. And then the gap continues. So then how do we play this game? It's also another question. For solution focus to be recognized as evidence-based, I mean, we don't have to play the dirty game. We can actually also challenge exactly as what you say, what's being recognized. And for us to do that, we need research.
Sorry,
Yes,
I'll stop talking
period.
soon. But it's about changing the arena, right? It's so the arena is problem focused at the moment, and so we can try and fit into that square hole with our round peg, or we can go, well, what's the proof that this arena is actually correct or the best one, or is there actually research that shows that there are other ways of framing this arena?
Can we design this research, everybody? Come on, we can do this.
This is actually something that's happening. Like right now, there's a project here that's been implemented, and I asked the person who's implementing it why, because they've watered down ACT to implement this project. And I asked them why they didn't use solution focused, because the environment that they're putting it in is the environment that solution focus came out of. like lower socioeconomic. You only have one chance to talk to them. And I was like, why did you? And he was completely across the solution focused research. He knew exactly about it, but the systems wouldn't allow him to use solution focused. It's like, no, you've got to use CBT or ACT, and ACT doesn't fit, but ACT uses mostly solution focused, so they're going to do that. Because ACT is, I actually call it the introduction to postmodern therapy for traditional therapists.
Okay.
So they're comfortable with it. The government is comfortable with it because it came from a doctor, and they're using the solution focused in it. But they won't look at the solution focused research that exists because it's not comfortable. Yeah.
And how
so
do
that really frustrated me.
Yes. I'm so glad we're talking about what frustrates you. And I think that's useful, you know? Now, Kati, like turning back to you, because I know that you study and you actually read research and so on. And kind of like, what is a piece of research that you wish we had?
Oh, wow. Yeah, linked to something you mentioned before, how is a process linked to the outcome? I really wish we had a revisited version of what, when someone does solution focused in a consequent way, how is then, you said the word superiority. So can we somehow show that it's worth working this way? And why is it worth working this way? So I would love to have something in the hand that goes beyond this. Every approach is similar, and I just don't believe that.
You don't believe it, and how do you prove it? Yeah.
Yes, how do you prove it? And I think the only way to prove it would be to go on the level of the conversation instead of the big numbers. So somehow show that the impact of the single conversation.
And I think there are different ways of going about it. But I think, questions like that, Kati, is such a great beginning for all of us to consider what kind of research can be done or should be done. And when I teach research method, and I just love that course because then the fear of doing research disappears. Because everything starts with a research question. When you have a question, that's going to direct the methodology of it. How do you go about now learning it? Are you going to do surveys? Are you going to do questionnaires? Are you going to do interviews? And are you going to do observations? And so whatever the question is will really determine the method. And you should be able to say, here's why I'm doing it this way. And I think some people say, oh, isn't it like quantitative, qualitative? It's not just about that because you can always qualitize quantitative. So for example, if I see a survey, two comparative surveys, I can always qualitize it by telling a story about it. I can also look at qualitative study, which a lot of times we do in social science. You can always quantize the qualitative data as well. You see the stories, like how we look at transcript. I counted the words. That's how you quantize the qualitative data. So I do mixed methods. So I mix them up. So when you mix them up, now we have a data that we can collect and looking at it from so many different perspectives, qualitative, quantitative. And then not only that, then with that data and information and insight that you have, you tell a different story. You decide what story you're going to tell and how you're going to actually share this research with people. And that's really all there is. And how we go about doing that really starts with this research question. So I don't want to even actually call it a research question because people get too serious when we say research question. But starting with what's your minor discontentment? What's your wish that we had researched already? What do you wish that you knew more about? So I'm going to pose these questions to you as an ongoing question because I, see the time as we kind of wrap up this session. How do we think like a researcher? And especially doing solution-focused practice, how do we think like a researcher who are familiar with solution-focused practice? And I say this with urgency that we need to form a research group. I think it's community of practice where we come and brainstorm and support each other in our research, especially for academics. All of us are not academics. Well, I am, but also I consider myself a pracademic. Practitioners showing up and get supported with some of these things so that you can go back to your whatever places, funders or decision makers and say, look, this is a research. So not only doing the research, but also be informed. So I really hope that you take this seriously because I think it's a basic question that we should ask. So
Hey,
anyway,
Sam,
that was my best hope. Kati, yes.
how would you know that we and they are taking it seriously?
Yeah, you know what? That's such a good question. How do I know is usually, um, I think a couple things you will actually think about it. Not only you think about what might be a really good research question that we should consider, all of us in the community, but also something very tangible. Can we collect them and have it as like a Kati, that 100 research ideas booklet?
Mhm.
So we can have like booklet with 100 research ideas that we can post to the community. And not only that, when we maybe we can actually have a regular sort of gathering every 2 months or something to put minor pressure on researchers to so that they they actually do the work. Yeah, what about you, Kati? What are your sort of like, moving forward? What would you like to see more of out of this conversation and community?
Yeah. You mentioned this list of 100 research questions. It was done
Hmm.
by a coaching community. And
Hmm.
what I'm very much aware of that is that coming together and actually spend time together around it
Hmm.
was part of the process. And um, I would love to see a gathering, a time, a,
Hmm.
a, maybe a camp type of thing. Spend time together with these questions. Um,
You
longer
know,
than 55 minutes.
longer than 55 minutes. And also what else I would love to see is bring researchers
Hmm.
so that not only we learn about their research, but I want their feedback on research design,
Yes.
right? So people who specialize in certain things. I mean, I can even teach mixed methods or give, feedback, but we have so many other people in the community who can give feedback and really like give us like ideas about, oh, what about this? What about that? I would love that idea of like people coming in to do that so that we learn the language of funders. We learn the language of people who are so that we can really promote this practice. I think that's just a hurdle that we need to learn to run. Yeah. Hey, let me actually also invite you, if you can please put in the chat box, what's been useful for you in this conversation as we conclude our conversations about research? What's been useful for you? What would you like to try? Or even like, would you like to join this Pracademics Corner idea? I mean, we also have Journal of Solution Focused Practice that we can also link to. If there's a research, we can publish it. So, I mean, it's like, let's use all the resources we have, right?
And the journal you just mentioned has even a description of what is good research they would publish. I think that's helpful too.
Mm-hmm. What makes a good research? And Shema, thank you. Using what makes you angry is such a great resource for your research question. Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining this topic. And we're just beginning. Session is ending, but I hope that this community is just beginning from all of you from different parts of the world. And I hope that we're starting something here. You know, SFBTA is here, right? And then EPTA is there. And can we get together, all the researchers together and do something meaningful? I would love to see that.